after Still I Rise, they were they had plans to do a 4 CD box set on Tupac, which was going to be just a bunch of unreleased stuff because the Still I Rise came out and it ended up doing really well, which they weren't sure if the remixes would go over well or not. So after that Still I Rise came out, what they did was they had Amaru send over basically it's like a little black zipper thing full of CDs that basically contained rough mixes of all the songs that were left that they were considering to put on the 4 CD set. So some of them were remixes, the majority of them were the original versions or whatever, and the reason they were given over to Death Row was, at the time, Death Row was going to be the main person involved with putting out that 4 CD box set, which was going to be called From the Vault. And basically, the point of those reference CDs was to see if there were any samples or any guest appearances that could cause any problems if they chose to put them out the way that they had them on the CDs. So pretty much after they had possession of the CDs and they were going through stuff and figuring out what they wanted to put out, the change basically happened because I don't know if it exactly was Amaru or if it was Interscope, but one of them basically decided that fans wouldn't pay, $50 to $60 for a CD, even if it was 4 discs. So they decided to break it up into 2 releases, which became Until the End of Time and Better Days. And
but they actually had a layout of how it was going to look.
They had the artwork and everything already done, and it was going to be like a cardboard fold-out case where, the first fold would be from the left to the right, and the back side of that would have a disc in it, and then you would fold from the bottom to the top, and that would contain a disc, and then from the left to the right, which would contain the third disc, and then from the top to the bottom. So it was basically, once you opened it all up, it was just a big cardboard square that had 4 CDs on each corner of it or whatever. And the artwork on, this wasn't finalized or anything, but the artwork on the disc was basically just like a vault. And it would say, disc 1, disc 2, disc 3, disc 4, Tupac from the vault or whatever with the logos on it. But that never ended up happening because they ended up changing their mind and breaking it up into two releases. After that, I believe, and I'm not 100% sure about this, but I believe it was Molly who gave the CDs to Death Row to review and go over and listen to stuff. And at the time, she had given those discs directly to somebody who was working in Suge's office, because the way the Death Row office was is you had the main number, which, if you called the main number, you would get the receptionist for the office. Like if you were to walk in there and go through the lobby, there was that receptionist. But there was a whole separate phone number and a whole separate receptionist for Suge's office. So I believe it was Molly. It was it was somebody at Amara. I don't know who. Like I said, I think it was Molly. Gave them to the person that was the girl that was Suge's assistant at the time. So after everything had happened, they listened to everything and all that was done. She was getting ready to leave. I don't know if she got fired or if she was just deciding to leave, but she was getting ready to leave the company. So she was packing up all her stuff or whatever, and the guy who was Suge's assistant at the time basically came in and was just like, oh, you can't take these. And I believe she said something along the lines of, well, I got to give them back to Molly or whatever. And their basic rules, like, you can't leave the office with something like that. So from that point, he took them or whatever, and I don't know if he just stashed them away, because at the time Suge was in jail. But, because this was, you got to remember, this was in early 2000, and Suge didn't get out till 2001. But and that was right after Until the End of Time. So they still had the CDs to try to pick stuff for the second double CD at the time, and that's when Suge was out of jail. But I don't know if people remember this or not, but pretty shortly after he got out, he got into that trouble with the valet or whatever and got sent back to jail for 6 months. So when he got sent back to jail for 6 months, that's when Amaro just put together Better Days the way they did, and didn't really include Death Row in any of the process or anything like they did with Until the End of Time. So the CDs were probably stashed away after, Suge got out of jail, and, they probably started listening to stuff to see what was still left to put on Better Days. But when he went to jail, that probably killed all those plans. So the CDs, I would imagine, were either kept in Suge's office somewhere where people couldn't get to them, or they were made, because they were pretty notorious for hiding things. They would, if something was pretty secret and they didn't want anybody to get a hold of it or to be able to walk out with it if somebody wasn't watching them, they would hide stuff away. They would put it up to where people wouldn't even think to look there. So how they got from that office to the auction, I have no idea. But I do know when they were packaging, they're basically putting everything and packing everything from the old, from the office, from the Wilshire Boulevard office, because they were going to give it over to the government to settle some of the tax debts or whatever. And I know for a fact that those CDs came up at that point. Go ahead.
Before the raid, right?
Yeah, I believe this was after the raid.
This was
when they were done with that office. Like, they were packing everything up because they were no longer going to stay in that office. And when they got raided, they were still there. They were there as if everything was normal. Because very briefly, they moved from that Wilshire office. After they gave that office to settle the tax stuff, they very, very briefly moved into the Fox Towers. They had an office there, which is where they started filming that reality show that never did anything. But
okay.
But yeah, so in between moving there, they were packaging up stuff to put into storage, and those CDs were looked at, and from what I was told, they knew what they were, and they're like, these can't just end up anywhere, so let's put these aside. And that was the last I heard of them. And then, the next thing I know, I heard they were sold at the auction after Death Row was sold, and, how they got there definitely wasn't on purpose. But, like I said, I don't know how they got there. It's kind of one of those things.
All the top guys at Death Row knew about those, about that little case, about that little folder, those CDs.
I would say probably 3 people knew about them. The lady who got them, who was Suge's receptionist, Suge himself, and Suge's assistant. But, to be honest, they would bring in people to listen to stuff and get people's opinions. So I know, a couple of artists came in and listened to stuff. I know at the time the guy, Miles, who did the Death Row website with me, he lived in Anaheim. He actually was going to the office for a totally separate reason, but ended up being able to listen to some of the songs because he just, happened to be there the day they were doing it. But other than that, I would say a very, very small handful of people know about those CDs. I would say, everybody combined, probably less than 10 people.